The anniversary dinner was supposed to be a celebration of our love, a night of champagne toasts, shared memories, and whispered promises for the future. It was our 10th year together, a milestone I had spent weeks planning to perfection. Little did Roman know that while he was preparing to shatter my world, I had already been collecting the pieces for months. I remember standing in our master bathroom that evening, applying my makeup with careful precision. The reflection staring back at me wasn't just a wife preparing for her anniversary dinner. It was a woman armed with knowledge, evidence, and an unshakable resolve that had been building for nearly a year. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The red dress hanging on the door was new, purchased specifically for this night. Not because I was celebrating our marriage, but because I wanted to look my absolute best when Roman's carefully constructed lies finally collapsed around him. Our story began 12 years ago at a literary festival in the city. I was there promoting my first book, a modest collection of short stories that had gained unexpected attention from a small but dedicated readership. Roman was a literary agent attending the festival to scout new talent. He approached me after my reading, his smile confident but genuine, his interest in my work seemingly sincere. What started as a professional conversation over coffee evolved into dinner the following evening, and within 6 months, we were inseparable. Roman was everything I thought I wanted: intelligent, ambitious, supportive of my writing career. When he proposed during a weekend trip to the coast, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Our wedding was intimate but beautiful, with close friends and family gathered at a historic mansion overlooking the ocean. We purchased our home a year later, a charming craftsman with a dedicated office space where I could write. From the outside, we were the couple others envied: successful professionals with a beautiful home, active social lives, and what appeared to be an unwavering devotion to each other. The first 7 years of our marriage weren't perfect. No relationship is, but they were genuinely happy. We traveled when our schedules allowed, hosted dinner parties for our eclectic group of friends, and supported each other through professional challenges and successes. Roman's agency grew steadily more prestigious, and my third novel brought the critical recognition I had been working toward. We discussed having children, but agreed to wait until my career was more established, and his agency had reached a certain level of stability. The subtle shifts began during our 8th year together. So gradual I almost missed them. Roman started traveling more frequently for work, publishing conferences, meetings with potential clients, industry events that suddenly couldn't be missed. The calls from the road grew shorter, his descriptions of his days more vague. He developed a habit of taking his phone with him everywhere, even to shower. The password on his laptop changed without explanation. I wish I could say I confronted him immediately, demanded the truth in a dramatic showdown worthy of one of my novels. But the reality was messier, more hesitant. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the distance I felt growing between us was a natural phase in a long-term relationship. I threw myself into finishing my 4th book, ignoring the late-night texts that would make him step outside to respond, pretending not to notice the unfamiliar cologne that occasionally clung to his shirts. It was my closest friend, Annie, who finally forced me to see what I had been working so hard to ignore. We were having lunch when she placed her hand over mine and asked, with uncharacteristic directness, if everything was okay with Roman and me. When I assured her things were fine, she hesitated before telling me she had seen Roman the previous weekend at a restaurant in the next town over. He'd been with a woman, their body language unmistakably intimate. Annie described her in detail: tall, blonde, younger than me by at least a decade. They had been holding hands across the table, oblivious to anything but each other. That night, after Roman claimed he was working late at the office, I did something I never thought I would do. I checked his location on our shared account and drove to the address. It was an upscale apartment building downtown, not his office. I sat in my car for 3 hours until I saw him emerge, alongside a woman who matched Annie's description. They kissed goodbye at her door. Not a friendly peck, but the lingering kiss of lovers reluctant to part. I drove home in a daze, my mind cycling through every possible explanation that wouldn't destroy the life we had built. But by the time I arrived, the numbness had given way to a cold clarity. I didn't confront Roman when he finally came home, smelling of expensive wine and that unfamiliar perfume. Instead, I made a decision that would change everything. If Roman was playing a game, I would play it better. I wouldn't react. I would prepare. The next morning, I contacted Gloria, an old college friend who had become one of the city's most respected divorce attorneys. I described my suspicions, and she outlined what I would need if I decided to proceed with a divorce, especially if I wanted to protect myself financially. Roman had been managing most of our joint investments, and Gloria warned me that spouses often begin hiding assets once they've decided to leave. Her advice was clear: gather evidence, document everything, and above all, don't tip my hand. Over the next 9 months, I became someone I barely recognized: methodical, calculating, patient. I hired a private investigator who documented Roman's regular visits to the downtown apartment and identified the woman as Heidi, a 26-year-old junior literary agent who had joined his firm 2 years prior. I gained access to our financial records and discovered that Roman had indeed been moving money into separate accounts, preparing for a life without me. I found emails between them discussing their future together, their plans to travel, their timeline for when he would leave me. Each discovery was a fresh wound, but also confirmation that I was right to protect myself. I forwarded everything to Gloria, who helped me build a case that would ensure I wouldn't be left financially devastated when the marriage ended. We documented the marital assets Roman was attempting to hide, the company shares he had purchased. With our joint funds but placed solely in his name, the valuable first editions he had been quietly transferring to a storage unit I wasn't supposed to know about. All the while, I maintained the facade of a happy marriage. I attended industry events on Roman's arm, hosted dinner parties for his colleagues, listened attentively when he told me about his business trips. I wrote every day, finishing my novel ahead of schedule and securing a better publishing deal than any of my previous books. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, spent more time with my sister Lillian, and started taking classes in financial management. Quietly, steadily, I was building a life that could stand without Roman at its center. Which brings me back to our anniversary dinner. 10 years together, the last of which had been a masterclass in deception. His unwitting, mine, deliberate. I had chosen the restaurant carefully, an exclusive venue overlooking the city, public enough that Roman wouldn't make a scene, but private enough that we could speak freely. My red dress was striking but dignified, my makeup flawless, my composure absolute. In my purse was a small gift box containing not an anniversary present, but a USB drive with copies of all the evidence I had gathered. As I finished applying my lipstick, I heard Roman enter the bedroom behind me. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, a gift I had given him last Christmas. There was tension in his shoulders, a slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his tie. I recognized the signs by now. He was preparing himself for something difficult. "Are you ready?" he asked, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I turned to face him, my own smile perfectly calibrated, warm enough to be convincing, reserved enough to be natural. "Absolutely," I replied. "I've been looking forward to this all day." It wasn't a lie. After months of waiting, of gathering evidence and preparing for this moment, I was more than ready for whatever Roman thought he was about to unleash. He had no idea that his announcement wouldn't be a devastating surprise, but the trigger I had been waiting for. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tonight, one way or another, the truth would finally be acknowledged. And when the dust settled, only one of us would be left standing. The drive to the restaurant was quiet, the silence between us filled with unspoken words and calculated restraint. Roman kept adjusting his cufflinks, a nervous habit he'd developed over the years. I noticed how he checked his phone twice at red lights, turning the screen away from me. 3 years ago, I might have asked who was texting him. Now I already knew. I made reservations for 8, he said, breaking the silence as we approached the restaurant. I requested the table by the window, the one with the view you like. That's thoughtful, I replied, wondering if his consideration was born of guilt or simply part of the performance he'd planned for tonight. Either way, it didn't matter. I had chosen this particular restaurant not just for its privacy, but for its significance. It was where we had celebrated our first anniversary. The symmetry felt appropriate. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment when the first cracks appeared in our marriage. It was during the launch party for my third novel 2 years earlier. The event was held at a prestigious bookstore downtown, with nearly 100 people in attendance. Roman had organized everything, showing the supportive husband to perfection. Yet throughout the evening, I noticed his attention repeatedly drawn to a corner of the room where a small group of junior agents stood, Heidi among them. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Roman was a senior agent. Networking was part of his job. When he introduced me to Heidi later that evening, she was appropriately deferential, complimenting my book and asking intelligent questions about my writing process. If her hand lingered a fraction too long on Roman's arm, if her smile held something beyond professional admiration, I didn't register it. I was too caught up in the success of my book, in the validation of seeing my words in print, to notice the subtle shift occurring right before my eyes. The weeks following the launch party brought the first noticeable changes. Roman started working later, claiming the agency was taking on new clients and expanding its reach. He began attending industry events alone, insisting they were too boring for me and that I should focus on starting my next book instead. Our weekend brunches, a tradition since we first started dating, were increasingly canceled due to urgent client meetings. One particular Sunday morning stands out in my memory. I had woken early, prepared his favorite breakfast, and was looking forward to discussing a new plot idea with him. Roman emerged from the shower, checked his phone, and immediately claimed he needed to go into the office. A client emergency, he said. I offered to make him coffee to go, but he declined, already, heading for the door. As he left, I noticed he was wearing cologne, something he never did for regular workdays. That afternoon, I called the office on the pretense of leaving a message, only to have the weekend receptionist tell me no one was in that day. When Roman returned that evening, smelling of unfamiliar perfume and with the collar of his shirt slightly smudged with what looked like lipstick, I still didn't confront him. Instead, I began to pay closer attention. His passwords changed. His phone never left his sight. Mysterious charges appeared on our credit card statements. Dinners at restaurants we'd never visited together. A hotel room in the city despite our home being only 20 minutes away. A jewelry purchase from an upscale boutique that never made its way to me. When I casually mentioned these charges, Roman had explanations ready. Business dinners with clients, a room for an out-of-town author too drunk to drive home, a gift for his mother's birthday. I almost believed him. Almost wanted to believe him. But the signs continued to multiply. There was the unexplained weekend conference that I later discovered hadn't existed. The work call I overheard at midnight that consisted mostly of hushed laughter and plans to meet. The business card I found, in his jacket pocket with a lipstick kiss and a phone number scrawled on the back. Each discovery was like a small stone added to a growing pile of evidence I wasn't ready to acknowledge. Then came the text message that changed everything. Not because it revealed something new, but because it confirmed what I had been trying to deny. Roman had left his phone on the kitchen counter while showering, something he never did. When it chimed with an incoming message, I didn't hesitate. The preview on the screen read, "Last night was amazing. I can't wait until you're finally free from—" The rest was cut off, but it didn't matter. The sender was saved as H, and the message had come with a photo I couldn't fully see but could identify enough of to know I didn't want to view the rest. I placed the phone exactly as I had found it and went for a long walk, my mind racing with possibilities, none of them involving the preservation of our marriage. When I returned home, Roman was dressed and preparing to leave for work, his phone securely in his pocket. I kissed him goodbye as always, told him I loved him as always, and watched him drive away. Then I sat at our kitchen table and made 2 phone calls, one to Annie, who had been trying to tell me the truth for months, and one to a divorce attorney whose number I had saved but hoped never to use. By the time we pulled up to the restaurant for our anniversary dinner, I had undergone a transformation Roman knew nothing about. The woman who had once built her life around his approval and validation had been replaced by someone stronger, someone who understood that survival sometimes required strategic silence. As the valet opened my door, I prepared myself for the evening ahead. Roman thought he was about to deliver a devastating blow. He had no idea he was walking into a carefully laid trap of my own making. The maitre d' greeted us by name, congratulating us on our anniversary with practiced charm. Roman's smile tightened as he thanked him, his hand barely touching the small of my back as we were led to our table. I noted how he avoided my eyes, focusing instead on the spectacular city view. 10 years, I said after we were seated, raising my water glass in a mock toast. Who would have thought we'd make it this far? Roman cleared his throat, reaching for his own water with unsteady fingers. Yes, 10 years is significant. I watched him study the wine list with unusual intensity. This was a man I had once known better than myself, whose expressions I could read like my favorite book. Now, looking at him, I realized how much of our intimacy had been one-sided. I had been transparent while he had been carefully opaque, revealing only what served his narrative. Should we order the Barolo? I suggested, naming the wine we'd shared on our first anniversary in this very restaurant. For old time's sake? He looked startled, then nodded. Of course. Perfect choice. As the sommelier opened and poured our wine, I observed Roman's practiced social performance. He asked about the vintage, commented knowledgeably on the bouquet, approved the pour with the confident air that had once impressed me. I wondered how much of our marriage had been this kind of performance, Roman playing the role of devoted husband while building a separate life with Heidi. To 10 years, he said, raising his glass once we were alone again, his voice steady but his eyes unable to hold mine. To truth, I countered, clinking my glass against his. However painful it might be. He paused mid-sip, confusion briefly crossing his features before he masked it with another smile. Truth? Yes. The appetizers arrived. Tuna tartare for him, oysters for me. I had always hated oysters, a fact Roman had once known intimately. His failure to register my unusual order was another small confirmation that his attention had long since wandered elsewhere. How's the new manuscript coming? Along? He asked, clearly trying to steer us toward safe conversational territory. Finished, actually. I submitted it last week. You did? Genuine surprise colored his voice. I didn't realize you were that far along. There's been a lot you haven't realized lately, I replied, my tone light despite the weight of my words. Roman shifted in his seat, loosening his tie slightly. I've been distracted with work. The agency's expansion has taken more of my time than I expected. Is that what we're calling it now? The agency's expansion? His fork clattered against his plate. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said, smiling as I took another sip of wine. Tell me more about how busy you've been. And he did, launching into an elaborate explanation of new clients and publishing deals, industry changes, and market pressures. I let him talk, nodding at appropriate intervals while cataloging every inconsistency, every unnecessary detail that signaled a carefully constructed lie. This was the Roman I had come to know over the past year, a man so convinced of his own narrative that he couldn't see the obvious flaws in his story. As our main courses arrived, steak for him, sea bass for me, I deliberately steered the conversation toward memory lane. Remember our honeymoon in Santorini? That little restaurant overlooking the caldera? Roman relaxed slightly, perhaps thinking I was moving us towards safer emotional ground. How could I forget? You were so sunburned you couldn't lie down for 2 days. And you stayed up all night reading to me because I couldn't sleep, I added, watching his face carefully. You said it was the most romantic night of your life, even though I looked like a lobster. His smile turned wistful. We were different people then. Were we? Or were you already planning your exit strategy, even back then? The question hung between us, sharp and unexpected. Roman's fork paused halfway to his mouth, his expression shifting from nostalgia to wariness. What are you talking about? Just wondering when exactly you decided our marriage had an expiration date, I said, cutting into my fish with precise movements. Was it before or after you met Heidi? The color drained from Roman's face, his carefully constructed facade cracking, visibly. He set down his utensils and took a long sip of wine, clearly buying time to formulate a response. I don't know who— Please don't insult my intelligence by denying it, I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. Not tonight. He stared at me, calculation replacing shock as he assessed this unexpected turn of events. I could almost see him recalibrating, adjusting, his script to account for this new variable. How long have you known? He finally asked. Long enough, I replied. Long enough to stop being surprised by anything you might say tonight. Roman leaned back in his chair, studying me with newfound caution. The power dynamic between us had shifted, and he was only now beginning to realize it. For a moment, I glimpsed something like respect in his expression, quickly replaced by defensive anger. If you've known, why the charade? Why pretend everything was normal? Why even agree to this dinner? I took my time answering, savoring the last bite of my sea bass before carefully placing my silverware on the plate. Because tonight wasn't my revelation to make. It was yours. I wanted to see if you'd actually go through with it. Go through with what? Breaking up with me on our anniversary, I said. It's a bit theatrical, don't you think? But then, you always did have a flair for drama. Roman's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists on the table. You don't know what I was planning to say. Don't I? I reached for my purse, extracting a folded paper that I placed beside his plate. 3 weeks ago, you drafted an email to Heidi. You wrote, and I quote, I'll tell her at our anniversary dinner. It seems fitting to end it where it all began. By this time next month, we'll be together openly. I pushed the paper toward him. You really should change your laptop password more frequently. For the first time since we'd entered the restaurant, Roman appeared genuinely at a loss for words. He unfolded the paper with shaking hands, confirming that I had indeed intercepted his private correspondence. You hacked my email, he finally said, accusation replacing shock. I protected my interests. I corrected him. Something you might want to consider doing yourself before the night is over. What's that supposed to mean? I smiled, reaching for my wine glass. It means, Roman, that I'm not the only one with revelations tonight. The difference is, you haven't been preparing for mine. Roman signaled for the waiter, ordering another bottle of wine with forced composure. His hands had stopped shaking, replaced by a calculated stillness that I recognized as his professional demeanor. The face he showed to difficult clients and challenging negotiations. Once we were alone again, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. What exactly do you want then? Money? The house? He attempted a dismissive laugh that didn't quite land. Is this some kind of blackmail? I considered him silently, struck by how quickly he'd pivoted from being caught to assuming I was operating with the same moral flexibility he'd demonstrated. It was almost impressive, this ability to reframe himself as the victim in a situation entirely of his creation. What I want, I said carefully, is for you to follow through with your plan. You came here to tell me something. I'm giving you the opportunity to do so with dignity. Confusion flickered across his face, followed by suspicion. This wasn't the confrontation he had anticipated. In his version of tonight's events, I was supposed to break down, to beg and plead, to make emotional appeals to our history. My calm expectation had thrown him off script. Fine, he said after a long pause, squaring his shoulders. I've been unhappy for a long time. We've grown apart, focused on our careers instead of each other. I didn't plan for any of this to happen, but I've fallen in love with someone else. I want a divorce. The words were delivered with practiced precision, likely rehearsed dozens of times in front of his bathroom mirror. There was even a hint of genuine emotion in his voice. Not remorse, but relief at finally speaking his truth aloud. And how long has this been going on? I asked, already knowing the answer, but curious if he would honor me with honesty even now. Roman hesitated, weighing the benefits of truth against his instinct for self-preservation. A year, he finally admitted. 3 years, I corrected quietly. Since my book launch, when Heidi joined your agency as a junior agent. You've been sleeping with her for 3 years, Roman. Nearly a third of our marriage. He flinched, then recovered. It wasn't physical at first. We connected intellectually, emotionally. The physical aspect came later. 6 months later, to be precise. Around the time you first started working late and changing your passwords. His eyes narrowed. Have you been spying on me? I've been paying attention, I replied. There's a difference. The waiter returned with our second bottle of wine, creating a momentary pause in our confrontation. I used the interruption to gather my thoughts, to remind myself that emotional control was my greatest advantage in this scenario. Roman had always underestimated me, assuming my creative temperament meant I was ruled by emotions rather than intellect. It was time to show him how thoroughly he had misjudged me. After the waiter departed, Roman seemed to regain some of his confidence. Look, I've been honest with you. I didn't want to hurt you, but these things happen. People grow apart. I'm sorry it's ended this way, but are you, though? I interrupted. Sorry? Because from where I'm sitting, this ending seems meticulously planned. Roman's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? I took a sip of my wine, letting the tension build before I responded. 2 months ago, you consolidated our investment accounts. Last month, you removed my name from our safety deposit box. 3 weeks ago, you met with Paolo. Paolo is my colleague, Roman said quickly. We had agency business. Paolo is a financial advisor who specializes in high-asset divorces, I corrected him. And you've transferred nearly $400,000 to accounts I'm not supposed to know about? The color drained from Roman's face for the second time that evening. I could almost see the mental calculations behind his eyes, the rapid reassessment of how much I knew and what it meant for his carefully constructed exit plan. You're mistaken, he said finally, but the confidence had left his voice. Am I? I reached into my purse again, removing a slim leather portfolio. Would you like to see the documentation? Account numbers, transfer dates, meeting logs? Or should we discuss the storage unit you rented in Heidi's name where you've been moving? Our art collection piece by piece? His gaze fixed on the portfolio, his expression transitioning from shock to something darker. You had no right. I had every right, I countered. They're marital assets, Roman. Assets you've been systematically hiding in preparation for a divorce, where I'd be left with nothing but the scraps of our life together. He leaned back in his chair, reassessing me with newfound wariness. I didn't realize you had become so calculating. I learned from the master. I offered him a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Consider it the final lesson of our marriage. The tension between us was interrupted by the arrival of the dessert menu. Roman waved it away impatiently, but I requested 2 espressos. This conversation was far from over, and I needed him alert for what was coming next. As we waited for our coffee, an almost surreal calm settled over our table. The initial shock of confrontation had passed, leaving in its wake a strange intimacy born of mutual acknowledgement. For the first time in years, we were seeing each other clearly, without the veil of pretense that had defined our recent interactions. "So what happens now?" Roman finally asked. "You've obviously been planning for this moment as much as I have. More thoroughly, I think." The espressos arrived, and I took a moment to add a single sugar cube to mine, stirring it with deliberate precision. "Tomorrow morning, my attorney Gloria will be contacting yours with a settlement proposal. I think you'll find the terms illuminating." "You've already drafted a settlement?" There was grudging respect in his voice now, mingled with apprehension. "Of course. I've had months to prepare, Roman. While you were focused on hiding assets, I was focused on finding them. While you were constructing an exit, I was constructing a case." "A case for what, exactly?" I met his gaze directly, all pretense gone. "For why the terms of our divorce will be dictated by me, not you." His laugh was short and dismissive, but his eyes betrayed his concern. "That's not how it works. My lawyer will advise you to accept my terms once he sees the evidence I've gathered." I finished for him. "Trust me on this, Roman. It's in your best interest." He stared at me, truly seeing me perhaps for the first time in years. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. "Because you're not the woman I married." "No," I agreed, finishing my espresso. "I'm the woman you created when you decided to betray everything we built together. And unlike your mistress, I'm not someone you want as an enemy." Roman signaled for the check, his earlier confidence now completely evaporated. I could see him recalculating, trying to determine exactly how much I knew and what it might mean for him. The restaurant continued its elegant hum around us. Couples celebrating, business associates negotiating, servers moving with practiced grace, all oblivious to the careful demolition of a decade-long marriage occurring at our window table. "You mentioned evidence," Roman said after the waiter had taken his credit card. "I assume you're bluffing to gain leverage." I smiled, reaching once more into my purse. This time I removed a small velvet box, the kind typically used for jewelry. I placed it on the table between us. "Happy anniversary, Roman." He stared at the box, suspicious but intrigued. After a moment of hesitation, he picked it up and opened it. Inside was not jewelry, but a small USB drive with the letter R engraved on its surface. "What is this supposed to be?" "Consider it a compilation album of our greatest hits," I replied. "Or more accurately, your greatest mistakes." His brow furrowed as he examined the drive. "More stolen emails?" "Oh, it's much more comprehensive than that." I leaned forward slightly. "It contains financial records documenting your systematic theft of marital assets. Time-stamped photographs of you moving artwork from our home to the storage unit. Audio recordings of your conversations with Paolo about hiding money from me during our divorce. And, most damaging of all, evidence of how you've been embezzling. From your literary clients' royalty payments to fund your new life with Heidi." The color drained from Roman's face for the 3rd time that evening. But now it didn't return. That's absurd. I haven't embezzled anything." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. "Luis Martinez might disagree. You've been skimming 5% off his international royalties for 2 years. Same with Archer Williams and at least 3 other authors. Small enough amounts that they might not notice individually, but together it adds up to nearly $200,000. His hand closed around the USB drive, knuckles whitening. You're making this up. The New York State Attorney General's office doesn't think so. They found my evidence quite compelling when I forwarded it to them last week. You what? His voice rose sharply, drawing momentary glances from nearby tables before he controlled himself. I gave them copies of everything, I confirmed. They're particularly interested in the offshore account you set up last year. The one where client funds seem to disappear and then magically reappear in your personal account a few weeks later. The waiter returned with Roman's card and the receipt. He signed mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. I watched him struggle to process what I was saying, to find some way to dismiss or minimize it. This would ruin me, he finally said, his voice barely audible. My career, my reputation. Yes, I agreed simply. It would. Why? The question seemed torn from him. If you knew all this, why wait? Why not expose me immediately? I considered him for a moment, this man I had once loved enough to build a life around. Because I wanted to be absolutely certain, because gathering conclusive evidence takes time, and because I needed to know if you would actually go through with this charade tonight. He looked down at the USB drive still clutched in his hand. And now that I have, now we negotiate. Roman's eyes narrowed with sudden calculation. So, this is blackmail. This is justice, I corrected him. Or at least, it's the closest approximation available to me. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with new eyes. What do you want? Everything, I said simply. The house, the investments, the art collection, full ownership of the intellectual property rights you've been managing for me. And most importantly, a clean, uncontested divorce with a confidentiality agreement that prevents you from ever discussing our marriage or its dissolution. You can't be serious, he scoffed. No court would award you everything. True, I conceded. But no court needs to be involved if you sign the settlement agreement Gloria has prepared. If you don't, I gestured toward the USB drive in his hand. Well, the Attorney General already has copies, but I'm sure your clients would be interested in seeing the originals. Roman's face hardened. You'd destroy my entire life over an affair? Not over an affair, I corrected him. Over 3 years of lies, manipulation, and theft. The affair is almost incidental at this point. He stared at me, a mixture of anger and grudging respect in his expression. And if I agree to your terms, then the evidence regarding your embezzlement becomes solely a matter between you and the authorities. I won't involve your clients or the press. That's still professional suicide. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But it gives you a fighting chance to resolve the legal issues privately. My terms at least leave you with your freedom and the possibility of rebuilding. The alternative is much worse. Roman was silent for a long moment, turning the USB drive over in his hands as though it contained toxic material. Finally, he slipped it into his pocket and met my gaze. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I had to, I replied. You left me no choice. For the first time that evening, something like genuine emotion crossed his face. Not love or remorse, but a complicated mix of resentment and respect. When did you become so ruthless? I'm not ruthless, Roman. I'm thorough. There's a difference. He laughed without humor. A distinction without a difference in this case. He reached for his wine glass, finishing the last of his Barolo in a single swallow. Does Heidi know about any of this? No, I said. Though I imagine she'll have questions when you don't leave me as planned. A flash of genuine pain crossed his features. I do love her, you know. It wasn't just about the sex. I know, I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my voice. That's why you got sloppy. Real emotions make people careless. He nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in my words. So what now? We just walk out of here and pretend this dinner never happened? Now we go home, I said, gathering my purse and standing. Tomorrow you'll meet with Gloria at her office at 10 to review and sign the settlement agreement. After that, you're free to pursue whatever future you imagine. With Heidi, minus the financial cushion you've been building, of course. Roman stood as well, his movements heavy with defeat. And you? What future are you pursuing after systematically dismantling our life together? I smiled, a genuine smile that felt foreign on my face after months of calculated performance. I'm going to finish my new book. It's about a woman who discovers her own power after years of living in someone else's shadow. I think it might be my best work yet. The valet brought Roman's car around, and we stepped out into the cool evening air. Neither of us spoke as we settled into the leather seats. The silence between us was different now, no longer tense with unspoken truths, but heavy with the weight of what had been revealed. As Roman pulled away from the restaurant, I noticed his knuckles were white against the steering wheel. "I never meant to hurt you," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the purr of the engine. "I know," I replied, watching the city lights blur past my window. "You meant to replace me. There's a difference." He flinched, but didn't argue the point. We drove through downtown in silence, the familiar landmarks of our shared life passing by like scenes from someone else's story. The bookstore where I'd held my first signing. The cafe where we used to spend Sunday mornings. The park where Roman had once proposed on a perfect autumn day. "I'm curious about something," Roman said as we waited at a red light. "When exactly did you figure it out? Not just the affair, but everything." I considered the question. It wasn't one moment. It was dozens of small inconsistencies that eventually formed a pattern. But if I had to pinpoint a turning point, it was probably the Jameson contract. His head snapped toward me, genuine surprise evident in his expression. The Jameson contract, that was over a year ago. Yes, you negotiated it brilliantly, secured a six-figure advance for a first-time author with exceptional rights retention. I was proud of you. I paused, remembering. Then I overheard you on the phone with Luis, telling him his royalty statements were delayed because of accounting issues. It made no sense that you could navigate the Jameson deal so expertly while bungling something as routine as royalty. Payments. Roman's jaw tightened. "So you started investigating me." "I started paying attention," I corrected him. "There's a difference." We lapsed into silence again as he navigated through residential streets toward our home. I noticed he was taking the long route, perhaps trying to delay our arrival, to postpone the moment when this new reality would have to be acknowledged within the walls we had shared for nearly a decade. "You know," he said after a while, "you could have confronted me, given me a chance to explain, to fix things." I turned to study his profile in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "Would you have been honest? Would you have stopped seeing Heidi, returned the money you'd hidden, confessed to your clients what you'd done with their royalties?" His silence was answer enough. "Besides," I continued, "confronting you would have only prompted you to hide your actions more carefully. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with." We turned onto our street, a quiet lane lined with mature oak trees and well-maintained craftsman homes. Our house sat at the end, its warm porch light glowing like a beacon in the darkness. Roman pulled into the driveway but made no move to turn off the engine. "I'll find a hotel tonight," he said, staring straight ahead. "I can come by tomorrow afternoon to pack some things, after the meeting with your attorney." "That's not necessary," I replied. "The guest room is made up. You can stay there tonight. It would look strange to the neighbors if you suddenly disappeared after our anniversary dinner." He laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "Still managing appearances, even now?" "Force of habit," I admitted. "Something else I learned from you." Roman finally turned off the engine, plunging us into relative silence. For a moment, neither of us moved to exit the car, as though crossing the threshold into our home would make this new reality irrevocable. Was any of it real? I asked suddenly, surprising myself with the question. These past 3 years, was any part of us still genuine? Roman was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness I hadn't heard before. Parts of it were real, more than I probably deserved to claim. I did love you once, very much. And even after Heidi, there were moments when I remembered why I had fallen in love with you in the first place. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. But I think I stopped seeing you clearly a long time ago. I reduced you to a character in my own narrative rather than recognizing you as a person with agency and intelligence. A fatal mistake for a literary agent, I observed. His mouth quirked in a humorless smile. Apparently so. We finally exited the car and walked toward the house, maintaining a careful distance from each other. As I unlocked the front door, I was struck by how ordinary everything looked. The entryway table with its stack of mail, the framed photographs lining the hallway wall, the vase of fresh flowers I had arranged just that morning. Nothing in this space reflected the seismic shift that had occurred between its occupants. I'll be up for a while, working in my office, I said, slipping off my heels by the door. The settlement agreement is on the kitchen counter if you want to review it before tomorrow's meeting. Roman nodded, loosening his tie with a distracted air. I should call Heidi. She's expecting, well, a different outcome from tonight. I imagine she is. I started toward the stairs, then paused. You should know that the guest room phone is connected to the home security system. All calls are recorded. He stared at me, incredulous. Are you serious? No, I admitted. But your reaction is illuminating. For a moment, we regarded each other across the entryway. Two people who had shared a bed, a home, a life, and who now stood as carefully distant as strangers. The air between us seemed charged with all the words we weren't saying, all the emotions we weren't expressing. For what it's worth, Roman said finally, I am sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for all of it. I studied him, searching for sincerity in the face I had once known better than my own. There was regret there, certainly. But whether it was for the pain he had caused or for the consequences he now faced, I couldn't tell. I believe you're sorry, I said at last. But I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He nodded, accepting this as his due. Fair enough. I turned and ascended the stairs, feeling his eyes on my back until I reached the landing. The weight of the evening pressed against me, threatening to crack the composure I had maintained throughout dinner. But I wouldn't break, not yet. There would be time for that later, when I was truly alone. For now, I had one more role to play. The woman who had outmaneuvered her husband at his own game. The woman who had turned betrayal into opportunity. The woman who walked away not as a victim, but as a victor. Once inside my office, I closed the door softly and leaned against it, finally allowing the careful facade I'd maintained all evening to crumble. My hands trembled as I reached for the desk chair, lowering myself into it before my legs could give way. The confrontation at dinner had drained me more completely than I'd anticipated. For nearly a year, I had focused all my energy on preparation, gathering evidence, consulting with Gloria, building my case against Roman. The actual moment of confrontation had seemed distant, almost theoretical. Now that it had happened, now that I had played my hand and revealed the extent of my knowledge, the emotional impact hit me with unexpected force. I opened my laptop, navigating to a secure folder that contained duplicates of everything on the USB drive I'd given Roman. The evidence of his betrayal was meticulous, overwhelming in its thoroughness. Financial records spanning 3 years, email exchanges with Heidi, time-stamped and cataloged, photographs taken by the private investigator I'd hired, audio recordings from the home office system. Roman had never realized captured conversations between him and Paolo. Looking at it now, I was struck by how much of my recent life had been defined by this accumulation of evidence. While Roman had been building a future with Heidi, I had been building a case against him. Both of us engaged in elaborate constructions the other wasn't supposed to discover. My phone chimed with a text message from Annie. "How did it go? Are you okay?" I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Was I okay? I had achieved precisely what I'd set out to do. Roman was cornered, with no choice but to accept my terms. I had reclaimed control over my life and secured my financial future. By any objective measure, tonight had been a success. And yet, beneath the satisfaction of victory lay a deeper, more complex emotion. Not regret, exactly, but a melancholy, recognition of what had been lost. Not just my marriage, which had been effectively over for years, but my own innocence. The woman who had once believed in Roman's love, who had trusted implicitly and loved unreservedly, no longer existed. In her place stood someone harder, more cautious, more strategic. I texted back a simple response. "Mission accomplished. Talk tomorrow," Annie replied immediately with a thumbs-up emoji and a heart. Her unwavering support throughout this ordeal had been my lifeline. The one person who knew the full extent of what I was planning and why. Without her, I might have confronted Roman months ago in a burst of hurt and anger, squandering the advantage that patience and preparation had ultimately provided. Downstairs, I heard movement in the kitchen, the sound of the refrigerator opening, glasses clinking. Roman was making himself at home one last time. I wondered what he was thinking now, how he was processing the complete inversion of his carefully laid plans. Had he called Heidi yet? How would he explain that their future together would not include the financial cushion he had promised? My computer chimed with an incoming email. It was from Gloria, confirming our appointment tomorrow and checking that everything had gone as planned at dinner. I replied briefly, assuring her that Roman would be at her office at 10 as arranged. The Wayne email reminded me of our first consultation nearly 8 months ago. I had arrived at Gloria's office with a manila folder containing my initial evidence of Roman's affair, pathetically thin compared to the dossier I would eventually compile. I remembered how Gloria had listened without judgment as I explained my suspicions, then outlined my options with a clarity that had cut through my emotional fog. "You can confront him now with what you have," she had said. "Or you can wait, gather more evidence, and ensure you're protected when the confrontation eventually happens. The choice is yours. But remember, in my experience, the spouse who acts from emotion typically loses to the spouse who acts from strategy." I had chosen strategy, committing myself to a path that required patience, deception, and a level of calculation that didn't come naturally to me. Each step had hardened my resolve, each new discovery about Roman's betrayal reinforcing my determination to emerge from our marriage with my dignity and financial security intact. A knock at my office door interrupted my thoughts. I closed my laptop quickly, smoothing my expression before calling, "Come in." Roman appeared in the doorway, changed from his suit into jeans and a t-shirt. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing than the man who had dominated our marriage for so long. "I made some tea," he said, holding out a steaming mug. "I thought you might want some." I accepted the mug with murmured thanks, surprised by the gesture. It was the kind of thoughtful act that had characterized our early years together before ambition and indifference had eroded the foundation of our relationship. "I've reviewed the settlement agreement," he said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "It's thorough. Gloria is very good at her job." He nodded, absently running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner. About when things changed. When I changed." I took a sip of the tea, chamomile with honey, exactly how I preferred it, and regarded him over the rim of the mug. "And?" "I think it was after your second book won the National Book Award." He leaned against the doorframe, his gaze fixed on some middle distance. I'd been telling everyone in the industry that you were exceptional, that your work was transformative. Then suddenly, everyone agreed with me. Publishers were calling, film studios were interested in adaptation rights. You were becoming exactly what I'd always said you would be. And that threatened you, I said, not as a question, but as a recognition of a truth I had sensed but never articulated. Yes. His admission was quiet but clear. I'd always been the successful one, the industry insider who was guiding your career. When you started outshining me, I didn't handle it well. So you found someone who looked up to you the way I used to. Someone whose career you could control. Roman winced. When you put it that way, it sounds pathetic. It is pathetic. I agreed, but without venom. And profoundly human. He met my gaze directly for the first time since entering the room. Why are we having this conversation? Why even try to understand what happened when it changes nothing about tomorrow? I considered the question, surprised to find I didn't have a ready answer. Maybe because understanding was always important to me, even when justice became the priority. Roman nodded slowly, accepting this. For what it's worth, I think your new book will be extraordinary. You've always written most powerfully about transformation. Yes, I said softly. I have that in abundance now. He lingered a moment longer, as though there were more to say, before straightening up and stepping back into the hallway. Good night, then. I'll see you in the morning. Good night, Roman. As his footsteps receded down the hall, I turned back to my laptop, opening a document I hadn't looked at in months. It was the first chapter of my new novel, begun before I discovered Roman's betrayal and abandoned in the aftermath. Reading it now, I could see how constrained the protagonist had been, how limited by her desire for approval and her fear of disruption. I placed my fingers on the keyboard and began to write, deleting the old text and starting fresh. This time, my protagonist would not be defined by what was done to her, but by how she responded. This time, she would emerge from betrayal not diminished, but enlarged. Like me. Morning arrived with unsettling normalcy, sunlight filtering through. The curtains, birds chattering outside the window. The distant hum of the coffee maker Roman had apparently programmed before going to bed. For a moment, I could almost believe the previous evening had been a dream, that our marriage remained intact, if imperfect. Then reality reasserted itself as I noticed the wedding ring I'd removed last night sitting on my nightstand. A small circle of gold that no longer symbolized commitment but confinement. I dressed with particular care, selecting a tailored charcoal suit that I'd purchased specifically for this day. Professional, polished, powerful, the visual antithesis of a victimized wife. As I applied my makeup, I found myself staring at my reflection, searching for visible signs of the transformation I'd undergone. The woman looking back at me appeared unchanged. Same eyes, same features, but something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. Downstairs, Roman sat at the kitchen island, dressed in a suit similar to the one he'd worn the night before, a cup of coffee cooling before him. He looked as though he hadn't slept, dark circles shadowing his eyes, his normally perfect hair slightly disheveled. I made coffee, he said unnecessarily. And there's some toast if you want it. Thank you. I poured myself a cup, maintaining a careful distance as I moved around the kitchen. Did you sleep? Not really. He gestured toward the stack of papers beside him, the settlement agreement Gloria had prepared. I spent most of the night reviewing this. It's incredibly comprehensive. It needed to be. He nodded, rubbing his face with one hand. I called Heidi early this morning. The statement hung in the air between us, an invitation to ask for details. I wasn't sure I wanted. Curiosity won out over dignity. How did she take it? About as well as you'd expect. Shock, disbelief, anger, then a lot of questions about money. Roman's laugh was bitter, Turns out our grand romance was predicated on some fairly specific promises about our lifestyle. You promised her my life, I observed, spreading a thin layer of almond butter on toast I didn't particularly want but needed to settle my stomach. A version of it, he acknowledged. Without you in it, of course. Of course. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the mundane act of breakfast surreal in the context of our imploding marriage. She's coming to the meeting today, Roman said, abruptly, setting down his coffee mug with slightly too much force. Heidi, she insists on being there. This was unexpected, a variable I hadn't accounted for in my careful planning. Why? She doesn't believe what I've told her. About the evidence, about the settlement terms. She thinks I'm exaggerating to get out of our relationship. His mouth twisted in a grimace. The irony is not lost on me. I considered this development, weighing its potential impact on the meeting ahead. Gloria won't allow her in the conference room. She's not a party to our divorce. I know, but she'll be in the waiting area. She wants to speak with you afterward. I have nothing to say to her. Roman shrugged. She's convinced you've manipulated me somehow, that I wouldn't agree to these terms unless you had, I don't know, brainwashed me or something. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of incredulous amusement. Brainwashed you? That's her theory? She doesn't know me as well as she thinks she does. He met my gaze directly. Or maybe she just doesn't know you at all. The acknowledgement that I was more formidable than his mistress had calculated should have been satisfying. Instead, it left a hollow feeling in my chest. Being feared or respected for my strategic thinking was a cold comfort compared to what I had once had. A husband who loved me for my creativity, my passion, my vision of the world. We should go, I said, glancing at the clock. Traffic will be heavy downtown. Roman nodded, gathering the settlement papers and his keys. We moved through the familiar routine of leaving the house, checking that doors were locked, adjusting the thermostat, confirming we had everything we needed, like actors performing well-rehearsed roles one final time. The drive to Gloria's office was silent, each of us occupied with private thoughts. I watched the city pass by, landmarks of our shared life appearing and receding like scenes from a movie I'd viewed too many times. The park where we'd once picnicked on Sunday afternoons, the theater where we'd attended foreign films that Roman pretended to understand better than he did, the corner where we'd kissed in the rain after learning my first book had sold. Memory was treacherous territory. Too many moments of genuine happiness tangled with the knowledge of how completely it had all unraveled. I thought about running, Roman said suddenly as we approached Gloria's office building. Last night, after you went to bed, I considered taking what cash I had, emptying our joint checking account, and disappearing. Why didn't you? The question wasn't accusatory, just curious. Several reasons. He pulled into the parking garage beneath the building. Practical ones, mostly. You've frozen almost everything except the checking account, which doesn't have enough to start over somewhere. My passport is in the safe deposit box you took me off of. But also, he hesitated. I realized I'm tired of running. From consequences, from responsibility, from the truth about who I've become. The admission surprised me. In all my planning, all my calculations, I had never factored in the possibility of Roman accepting accountability for his actions. I had prepared for denial, for counterattacks, for legal challenges, not for surrender. That's unexpectedly self-aware, I said finally. Don't give me too much credit. I'm still hoping to negotiate a slightly better deal than complete annihilation. A ghost of his old, confident smile flickered across his face. Professional pride, if nothing else. We exited the car and headed for the elevator, maintaining the careful distance that had defined our interactions since the previous evening. As the elevator doors closed, sealing us into the small space, Roman turned to me. There's one thing I've been wondering, he said. All those months you were gathering evidence, building your case. Didn't you ever consider trying to save our marriage instead? Confronting me, demanding I end things with Heidi, suggesting counseling? The question caught me off guard. Not because I hadn't considered it, but because I had. Extensively, painfully, during countless sleepless nights. Yes, I admitted as the elevator climbed toward Gloria's floor. I considered it every day for the first month after I found out. I drafted confrontation speeches in my head. I researched marriage counselors. I even drove to your office once, intending to demand you choose between us. What stopped you? The elevator doors opened, revealing the elegant reception area of Gloria's law firm. Before stepping out, I met Roman's gaze one final time as husband and wife. I realized I deserved better than fighting for someone who had already decided I wasn't worth keeping. Gloria's reception area was designed to intimidate, all sleek surfaces, muted colors, and strategically placed legal awards. The message was clear. This was a battlefield where victories were measured in paragraphs and precedents. I had been here many times over the past months, but seeing it through Roman's eyes, as an adversary rather than a client, gave me a fresh appreciation for its calculated austerity. Her assistant, a composed woman named Josie, who had always treated me with quiet compassion, greeted us with professional detachment. Ms. Wagner will be with you in a moment. Mr. Taylor, your attorney called to say he's running 5 minutes late. Roman nodded, taking a seat in one of the minimalist chairs arranged around a glass coffee table. I remained standing, too restless to sit, my attention caught by a figure pacing near the floor-to-ceiling windows at the far end of the reception area. Heidi was younger than I expected, despite having seen photographs from the private investigator's surveillance. In person, her youth was more pronounced, not just in her smooth skin or slender frame, but in the barely contained nervous energy that radiated from her. She wore a cream-colored dress that was slightly too formal for the occasion, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate updo that seemed designed to add years she didn't possess. When she spotted Roman, her expression shifted, from anxiety to relief, then hardened when her gaze landed on me. I met her eyes briefly, acknowledging her presence without greeting, before turning my attention to the case files Josie had handed me. Is that her? Heidi's voice carried across the reception area, loud enough to draw curious glances from other, waiting clients. Roman? Is that her? Roman winced, standing to intercept her as she strode toward us, determination in every step. Heidi, now isn't the time. I told you to wait. I'm tired of waiting. She brushed past him, positioning herself directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same scent I had detected on Roman's shirts for months. I want to hear from her exactly what she thinks she's doing. I glanced, up from the files, maintaining a calm that I knew would infuriate her more than any emotional response. Ms. Sanders, I presume? I'm afraid I have a confidential meeting about to begin. Perhaps another time. Don't dismiss me like I'm some irrelevant person. Her voice rose further, drawing Josie's concerned attention. I'm the woman Roman loves. I'm the one he chose. You're just trying to punish him because you couldn't keep him interested. The accusation might have wounded me months ago, when I still measured my worth by Roman's attention. Now, it barely registered as anything more than predictable. This isn't about punishment or interest, Ms. Sanders. It's about legal consequences for specific actions. Actions your relationship with my husband only partially encompasses. Roman stepped between us, his expression pained. Heidi, please, you're making this worse. Worse? She laughed, a brittle sound that revealed the cracks in her composure. How could it possibly be worse? You told me an hour ago that everything we planned is gone. The house, the travel, the fresh start. All of it vanished because she suddenly turned into some vindictive, evidence-gathering, That's enough. Gloria's authoritative voice cut through Heidi's tirade as she emerged from her office, elegant in a tailored navy suit that projected the confidence of someone accustomed to winning difficult battles. Ms. Sanders, I presume. I'm afraid you'll need to wait elsewhere. This is a private legal matter between my client and her husband. I have every right to be here, Heidi protested, though her certainty wavered under Gloria's steady gaze. I'm directly affected by whatever she's forcing Roman to sign. You have no legal standing in this divorce proceeding, Gloria replied, her tone professional but unyielding. If Mr. Taylor wishes to provide for you from whatever remains of his assets, after our settlement, that will be his prerogative, but you are not a party to this legal action. The word, whatever remains, landed with precision, and I watched the implications register on Heidi's face. Her gaze darted to Roman, who avoided eye contact, his earlier confidence replaced by the slumped posture of a man seeing his carefully constructed narrative crumble in real time. Roman? Uncertainty crept into her voice. What does she mean, whatever remains? You said we'd be fine. You promised we'd have enough to start over. Before he could respond, the elevator doors opened to reveal Paolo, Roman's financial advisor, accompanied by a silver-haired man I recognized as Seth Donovan, one of the city's most prominent divorce attorneys. The atmosphere in the reception area shifted instantly, charged with a new tension as the key players in our drama converged. Paolo faltered when he spotted me, guilt flashing across his features before he composed himself. He had been Roman's confidant and accomplice in hiding assets, unaware that I had discovered their scheme months ago and had been monitoring their communications ever since. Ah, a full house, Gloria observed with the faintest suggestion of a smile. Perfect timing. Shall we proceed to the conference room? Ms. Sanders, I'm afraid I must insist you remain here. She gestured to Josie. Perhaps you could offer Ms. Sanders some coffee while she waits. I'll stay right here, Heidi declared, though her earlier confidence had evaporated. Roman, we need to talk before you sign anything. Roman hesitated, torn between following us into the conference room and addressing Heidi's growing distress. In that moment of indecision, I saw the full weight of his choices bearing down on him, not just the legal and financial consequences, but the human cost to everyone involved. Go with them, I said quietly, surprising myself as much as him. Take 5 minutes with her first. She deserves that much. Gloria raised an eyebrow, but nodded her assent. 5 minutes, Mr. Taylor. Then we begin, with or without you. Relief and confusion mingled in Roman's expression as he nodded his thanks. I turned away as he led Heidi to a quiet corner of the reception area, their urgent whispers fading as Gloria guided me toward the conference room. That was unexpected, Gloria commented once we were out of earshot. Compassion isn't typically part of our strategy. It's not compassion, I replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced of that myself. It's pragmatism. If he doesn't address her concerns now, she'll be a disruptive factor throughout the proceedings. Gloria studied me with the perceptive gaze that had made her one of the city's most formidable divorce attorneys. Sometimes, even in the midst of justified anger, we glimpse the person we used to be, the one who could still feel empathy for those who hurt us. I didn't respond, unwilling to examine too closely the complex emotions swirling beneath my carefully maintained composure. Today wasn't about feelings. It was about finality, about securing the future I deserved after years of betrayal. As we entered the conference room with its imposing mahogany table and views of the city skyline, I took my seat at Gloria's right hand and arranged the evidence files before me. Outside, Roman and Heidi's conversation had escalated, their body language visible through the glass walls that separated the conference room from the reception area. Her gestures were becoming more animated, his posture increasingly defensive. The ripple effects of our failed marriage were expanding outward, touching lives beyond our own. creating patterns of consequence I hadn't fully anticipated when I set this day in motion. Through the glass walls, I watched as Heidi's expression transformed from disbelief to anger to something approaching desperation. She clutched Roman's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the fabric of his suit as though she could physically prevent him from entering the conference room. Roman kept shaking his head, his responses appearing to grow shorter and more definitive with each exchange. Seth, Donovan, and Paolo conferred quietly at the far end of the conference table, occasionally glancing in my direction with poorly disguised curiosity. They had prepared for a different scenario, perhaps a distraught wife willing to settle for emotional validation and modest financial consideration. The meticulously gathered evidence arranged before me represented a reality they were still struggling to process. "They've underestimated you," Gloria murmured, following my gaze to where Roman was now gently but firmly disentangling himself from Heidi's grip. "All of them. It's the most powerful advantage a woman can have in a situation like this." I nodded, remembering how often Roman had dismissed my observations or simplified my ideas throughout our marriage. That habitual underestimation had given me the space to build my case without suspicion. While he viewed me as an emotional creature incapable of strategic thinking, I had been methodically documenting his every misstep. Roman finally entered the conference room, his face a careful mask of professional detachment that couldn't quite conceal the strain underneath. Heidi remained in the reception area, her previous confidence shattered, watching through the glass with red-rimmed eyes as she sank into one of the minimalist chairs. "I apologize for the delay," Roman said, taking a seat opposite me. "Shall we proceed?" Gloria nodded to Josie, who closed the conference room door, sealing us into a space where the language of contracts and consequences would determine the end of a decade-long marriage. "Before we begin," Seth Donovan interjected, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to controlling negotiations, "I'd like to state for the record that my client is willing to engage in good faith discussions about equitable distribution of marital assets. However, the proposed settlement as written contains several provisions that are, frankly, excessive and potentially punitive." Gloria smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. "Mr. Donovan, with all due respect, I believe you're operating with incomplete information about the circumstances surrounding this divorce. Perhaps we should begin by ensuring everyone at this table has a clear understanding of the facts." She gestured to me, our pre-planned strategy unfolding exactly as we had rehearsed. I opened the first folder, removing several document sleeves containing financial records. "These are account statements from 5 offshore accounts established by my husband over the past 3 years," I explained, passing copies to Seth and Paolo. "You'll note that approximately $427,000 of marital assets were transferred to these accounts, ostensibly to hide them from equitable distribution in our divorce." Seth accepted the documents with practiced neutrality, though I caught the slight narrowing of his eyes as he scanned the first page. Paolo shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "Additionally," I continued, opening a second folder, "these are records documenting systematic embezzlement from client royalty accounts at the literary agency, specifically, funds diverted from international royalty payments that were subsequently transferred to personal accounts." Roman's composure faltered visibly as I presented this evidence, his hands clenching into fists beneath the table. He had known I possessed this information. I had told him as much at dinner, but seeing it laid out professionally, prepared for potential submission to authorities, made the reality of his situation impossible to ignore. "This is," Seth began, then paused, reassessing his approach as he continued reviewing the documents. "These are serious allegations that would require substantial verification." "They've already been verified," Gloria interjected smoothly, "by forensic accountants whose reports are included in your copy. But please continue reviewing while we proceed to the next category of evidence." I removed a third folder, this one containing email correspondences between Roman and Heidi spanning the past 3 years. These communications document not only the extramarital relationship, but also the explicit planning to remove marital assets prior to divorce proceedings. You'll note the timestamp on this particular exchange. I indicated a specific page, where the strategy to establish offshore accounts is first discussed. Seth's professional demeanor showed its first significant crack as he processed the thoroughness of the evidence before him. He leaned toward Roman, murmuring something I couldn't hear, while Paolo visibly paled reviewing the financial documentation that implicated him in potentially criminal activities. As you can see, Gloria continued, the settlement agreement we've proposed is not punitive but rather restorative. It simply returns to my client what was rightfully hers to begin with, while providing Mr. Taylor with the opportunity to resolve these matters without criminal prosecution. Roman finally spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. You said you wouldn't involve my clients, that the embezzlement would remain between me and the authorities. And I meant it, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. Nothing. In these documents will be shared with your clients if you sign the agreement as written, but Mr. Donovan needed to understand exactly what we're negotiating here. Seth set down the documents and leaned back in his chair, the calculation evident in his expression as he reassessed the balance of power in the room. He was a skilled attorney, accustomed to finding leverage in difficult situations, but the evidence before him left little room for maneuvering. I believe, he said carefully, that my client and I would benefit from a brief private consultation. Gloria nodded. Of course, we'll give you the room. As we stepped out into the reception area, I noticed Heidi was no longer waiting. Whether she had left of her own accord or been asked to leave, her absence created a strange sense of incompleteness, as though a necessary witness to the unraveling of Roman's carefully constructed deceptions had departed before the final act. He'll sign, Gloria murmured, guiding me to a quiet corner away from curious ears. Seth knows when a battle is lost. He's just creating the illusion of consultation to maintain professional dignity. I nodded, watching through the glass as Roman engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly heated discussion with his attorney. His gestures grew more animated, his expression transitioning from controlled frustration to something approaching desperation. This was the Roman few people ever saw, the one who emerged when his carefully constructed narratives began to collapse, when the charm and confidence gave way to the insecurity beneath. It's not just about the money for him anymore, I observed. It's about the story he told himself, that he was clever enough to get away with it, that he deserved both the security of our marriage and the excitement of his affair. Now he has to confront the reality that he's lost control of the narrative completely. Gloria studied me with newfound curiosity. You understand him very well for someone he so thoroughly underestimated. I had to, I replied simply. Understanding was the only weapon I had for a long time. Through the glass, I watched as Roman finally slumped back in his chair, the fight visibly draining from him as Seth pushed the settlement agreement across the table and held out a pen. The villain in my story was surrendering, not with dramatic defiance, but with the quiet resignation of someone finally facing the consequences of their actions. There was no satisfaction in watching his defeat, only a somber recognition that justice, when it finally arrived, was as much about endings as beginnings. The signing took place in near silence, broken only by the soft rustle of pages turning and the scratch of pen against paper. Roman's signature appeared on each designated line, hesitant at first, then increasingly fluid as resignation replaced resistance. With each page, another aspect of our shared life was formally severed. Financial entanglements unwound, property redistributed, legal obligations established. Gloria reviewed each signature with meticulous attention, ensuring no detail had been overlooked. Seth maintained his professional composure, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed his awareness of how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. Paolo remained silent throughout, his earlier confidence replaced by the wary demeanor of someone who suddenly realized he might be implicated in matters beyond his expertise. "And that concludes the formal agreement," Gloria announced as Roman signed the final page. "My office will file these with the court tomorrow. Given the comprehensive nature of this settlement, we anticipate the divorce will be finalized within 30 days. 30 days. After a decade of marriage and months of strategic planning, the legal dissolution of our union would be completed in less time than it took to plan our wedding. The symmetry was both fitting and strangely hollow. "There's one more document," I said, removing a slim folder from my portfolio. "Not part of the legal settlement, but equally binding." Seth's eyebrows rose. "Any additional agreements should have been included in the primary settlement." "This is different," I explained, placing the document before Roman. "It's a personal agreement between Roman and me, separate from the divorce proceedings." Roman opened the folder, his expression shifting from wariness to confusion as he read the single-page document inside. "This is not what I expected." "What is it?" Seth asked, professional caution evident in his tone. Roman continued scanning the document. "It's an agreement not to publicly disclose the details of our divorce or the circumstances surrounding it. Mutual confidentiality, essentially." Seth reached for the document, but Roman held it back, still reading. "It specifically prohibits either of us from discussing the embezzlement allegations with anyone, including—" He glanced up at me, genuine surprise in his eyes. "Including potential employers or literary clients." I nodded. "As I told you last night, my goal isn't to destroy your life or career. The legal consequences of your financial decisions are between you and the authorities. But our personal history, that remains private." "Why?" The question seemed torn from him, a genuine inability to comprehend my motivation after months of calculated legal maneuvering. "Because public humiliation serves no purpose except revenge," I replied. "And revenge has never been my objective." Gloria watched this exchange with professional interest, having been briefed on the confidentiality agreement, but not its underlying motivation. Seth appeared increasingly confused, the proceedings diverging from the acrimonious scenario he had clearly anticipated. Roman studied me for a long moment before signing the agreement without further consultation. "Thank you," he said quietly, sliding the document back across the table. "Don't thank me," I replied. "This protects both of us. I have no more desire to become gossip fodder for the literary community than you do." With the final signature complete, a strange silence descended over the conference room, the moment we had all been building toward. Roman and Heidi with their secret plans, me with my evidence gathering, our respective attorneys with their legal strategies, had arrived and passed with anticlimactic efficiency. No dramatic confrontations, no last-minute revelations, just the systematic dismantling of a shared life through methodical documentation. "Well then," Gloria said, gathering the signed papers into a precisely organized stack, "I believe our business is concluded. Mr. Taylor, my office will be in contact if any issues arise during the filing process, but we don't anticipate any complications." Roman nodded, rising from his chair with the slightly disoriented air of someone emerging from a long illness. "Is there anything else I need to do? Paperwork or—" "No," Gloria replied. "The settlement covers all necessary details. You're free to collect your personal belongings from the house as outlined in Section 12, but otherwise, no further action is required on your part." Free? The word hung in the air, its meaning shifting depending on one's perspective. For Roman, it represented release from a marriage that had become a constraint. For me, freedom from the uncertainty and betrayal that had defined the past 3 years. Neither interpretation felt particularly triumphant in this moment. We exited the conference room together, an awkward quartet moving through the reception area toward the elevators. Josie handed me a discreet envelope, a copy of all signed documents, with a sympathetic smile that momentarily cracked my professional composure. Her small kindness, offered without obligation, contrasted sharply with the calculated transactions that had dominated the morning. As we reached the elevator bank, Seth and Paolo stepped aside for a final consultation with Roman. The muted urgency of their conversation suggested they were already strategizing how to manage the professional fallout from the financial revelations. Roman's career wouldn't be destroyed. Talented literary agents rarely faced permanent exile, even after significant scandals. But his reputation would require careful rehabilitation. "You did well," Gloria murmured, standing beside me as we waited for the next elevator. Many clients lose their resolve in the final moments, let emotion override strategy. "You maintained focus throughout." "I had excellent guidance," I replied, grateful for her steady presence throughout this ordeal. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, empty except for a young couple holding hands, their matching gold bands suggesting newlyweds. They moved aside to make room, smiling with the unconscious happiness of people who couldn't imagine their love ever transforming into the formal dissolution we had just completed. I offered a polite smile in return, wondering if they could sense the weight of the documents in my bag, the finality of signatures still drying on heavyweight legal paper. Roman concluded his conversation and joined us in the elevator, maintaining a careful distance. The doors closed, sealing us into a temporary intimacy that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. We had shared countless elevator rides during our marriage, heading to dinner parties, returning from vacations, coming home from literary events where we'd played our roles as the perfect professional couple. Now we stood as near strangers, connected only by legal documents and fading memories. As the elevator descended, I caught Roman's reflection in the polished metal doors. He looked older, the confident facade stripped away to reveal the uncertainty beneath. For a brief moment, our eyes met in the reflection, and I glimpsed something that might have been regret, or perhaps simple acknowledgement of all that had been lost, not just between us, but within ourselves. The elevator reached the ground floor, doors opening to release us into our separate futures. The fallout was just beginning, but for the first time in months, I felt the possibility of moving forward unburdened by the weight of betrayal and deception. Whatever came next would be entirely my own, my choices, my consequences, my story to write. The house was achingly quiet when I returned. In the entryway, I removed my shoes and set down my bag, the folder of divorce papers inside it suddenly feeling both weightier and less significant than it had in Gloria's office. Legal resolution, it turned out, didn't automatically translate to emotional closure. I moved through the rooms like a visitor, noting details I'd somehow overlooked despite living here for years. The small crack in the kitchen ceiling that Roman had promised to fix last summer. The water stain on the dining room curtains from when we'd left the window open during a rainstorm. The slightly uneven bookshelf in the living room that held our combined collection of novels and memoirs, his literary theory texts intermingled with my dog-eared favorites. These imperfections had been background noise during our marriage, minor flaws in an otherwise perfect setting. Now they seemed like harbingers I should have recognized, small fractures that had predicted the eventual collapse. In the kitchen, I opened a bottle of wine, not to celebrate, but simply to feel something beyond the numb efficiency that had carried me through the signing. The first sip burned slightly, the second mellowed, and by the third, I felt the rigid control I'd maintained all day beginning to loosen. My phone chimed with a text from Annie. "Is it done? Do you need company?" I stared at the message, uncertain how to respond. Did I want company? The thought of explaining the day's events, of recounting Roman's defeated expression as he signed away our marriage, suddenly seemed exhausting. But the alternative, sitting, alone in this too-quiet house with only my thoughts for company, felt equally daunting. All signed, I texted back. Rain check on company? Need some time to process. Annie's response came immediately. Absolutely. I'm here when you need me. Proud of you? The simple affirmation, proud of you, unexpectedly brought tears to my eyes. What exactly had I accomplished that merited pride? I had successfully ended my marriage, secured my financial future, protected myself from Roman's betrayal. But beneath the strategic victory lay a profound personal failure. The death of a relationship I had once believed would last forever. I carried my wine into the office, settling at my desk where my laptop waited, the manuscript of my new novel glowing on the screen. Last night, after Roman had gone to bed, I had written nearly 2,000 words, channeling the anticipatory tension of our confrontation into my protagonist's own moment of revelation. The writing had flowed easily then, fueled by nervous energy and the certainty of imminent change. Now, reading those words, I recognized something hollow in them, a performative strength that rang false, a too neat resolution to complex emotional wounds. I highlighted the entire section and deleted it, watching the cursor blink in the empty space left behind. Truth, I realized, was messier than fiction. In novels, betrayal led to dramatic confrontations, followed by empowering independence or passionate reunions. Reality offered no such narrative satisfaction, just paperwork, polite legal language, and the disorienting absence of a future you had once taken for granted. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. I glanced at the clock. Nearly 8 in the evening, too late for normal visitors. A spike of anxiety shot through me. Had Roman returned already to collect his things? I wasn't prepared for another encounter, not with my carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole to find not Roman, but Lillian, my sister, holding what appeared to be a takeout bag from my favorite Thai restaurant. Relief washed over me as I opened the door. "Before you send me away," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Annie didn't send me. I just figured you might need food and sisterly support. If I'm wrong, I'll leave the pad thai and go." The simple kindness of her presumption that I would need nourishment and company on this of all days broke something loose inside me. Without warning, the tears I had suppressed throughout the legal proceedings, the controlled confrontation, the formal signing, spilled over. "Oh, honey," Lillian murmured, setting down the food and wrapping her arms around me. "Let it out. You've been strong long enough." And I did, sobbing against my sister's shoulder with an abandon I hadn't permitted myself in months. I cried not just for the end of my marriage, but for the woman I had been at its beginning. Hopeful, trusting, certain that love was something that could be counted on. I cried for the years spent with a man who had been creating a separate life, right under my nose, for the humiliation of discovering his betrayal, for the cold, strategic person I had become in response. Lillian guided me to the couch, keeping one arm around my shoulders as the tears gradually subsided. "I wasn't sure you'd let yourself feel this," she said softly. "You've been so focused on the legal side, on winning, that I was worried you'd never process the actual grief." "I didn't want to," I admitted, wiping my eyes with the tissue she offered. It felt like giving him power, like proving I was exactly what he thought. Too emotional, too vulnerable. "Feeling pain when something painful happens isn't weakness," Lillian replied. "It's human. And you, despite your best efforts to become some kind of divorce-seeking cyborg these past months, are still very human." A laugh escaped me, watery but genuine. A divorce-seeking cyborg? Is that how I've seemed? "A little bit," she confessed, her smile gentle. "A very well-dressed, articulate cyborg with excellent legal representation. But still, it's been a while since I've seen my actual sister under all that strategic planning." Her observation struck uncomfortably close to the truth. In my determination to protect myself from further hurt, to ensure Roman couldn't take advantage of my emotional vulnerability, I had suppressed not just my pain, but significant parts of my identity, my spontaneity, my openness, my capacity for joy. I don't know how to be her again, I whispered, the admission feeling like another kind of loss. The person I was before all this. Lillian squeezed my hand. You don't have to be her again. She existed in a world that doesn't anymore. But you don't have to be the fortress you've become either. There's something in between, someone who carries the wisdom from this experience, without being defined by it. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock Roman and I had purchased on our 5th anniversary, its steady rhythm continuing despite the dissolution of the marriage it had once commemorated. I brought wine too, Lillian said finally, reaching into her bag to produce a bottle. Figured we might need it? I already started, I admitted, gesturing toward my half-empty glass on the coffee table. Perfect. Then you have a head start. She headed to the kitchen for another glass. And while we eat, you can tell me what really happened today. Not the legal version, not the strategic version, but how it felt to finally end things. As she returned and poured herself wine, I realized this was exactly what I needed. Not solitude to nurse my wounds, not celebration of a battle won, but simple human connection with someone who knew both the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. The dark night of divorce had descended, but I wasn't facing it alone. 3 weeks after the signing, I stood in what had once been our shared bedroom, surveying the space Roman had cleared during his brief, almost clinical visit to collect his belongings. He had taken only what the settlement specified: his clothes, personal mementos, a few pieces of furniture that had belonged to his family. The room felt strangely balanced between absence and presence, like a photograph with a figure carefully cut out, leaving a perfect silhouette. Gloria had called that morning to inform me the divorce was officially filed and proceeding without complications. 30 days, she'd reminded me. Then it's final. Do you want to schedule a meeting to discuss next steps? Next steps. The phrase implied a clear path forward, a logical progression from married to divorce to what exactly? The strategic focus that had carried me through the evidence gathering and legal proceedings had waned, leaving me in an unfamiliar liminal space. Not quite married, not fully divorced, suspended between an ending and a beginning I couldn't yet envision. With determined hands, I began rearranging the room, moving the bed to face the eastern windows, where morning light streamed in, rather than the wall Roman had preferred for its proximity to the bathroom. I replaced the neutral bedding with a deep indigo comforter I'd purchased on impulse the previous week, its rich color transforming the room's energy. Small changes, but significant in their declaration. This space was now wholly mine, to shape, according to my preferences alone. My phone chimed with an email notification from my publisher. My new manuscript, the one I had restarted after discovering Roman's betrayal, had received enthusiastic feedback. Your strongest work yet, my editor wrote. The protagonist's transformation is absolutely riveting. We'd like to fast track. This for publication next spring. I sat on the newly positioned bed, reading the email twice to absorb its implications. The book I had written in the darkest period of my marriage, during hours stolen between evidence gathering and legal consultations, was being celebrated as my most powerful work. There was a profound irony in that my creative voice had strengthened even as my personal life unraveled. The doorbell rang, interrupting my contemplation. Through the peephole, I saw Annie on my porch, holding a plant in one hand and what appeared to be a folder in the other. I opened the door, greeting her with genuine warmth. Housewarming gift, she announced, thrusting the potted fiddle leaf fig toward me. I know it's technically not a new house, but it's a new chapter, which deserves some ceremonial foliage. I laughed, accepting the plant. Thank you, though fair warning, my track record with houseplants isn't stellar. This one's nearly indestructible, she assured me, following me inside. Like its new owner. We settled in the living room, where subtle changes reflected my ongoing reclamation of the space. Roman's academic tomes replaced by art books I'd always wanted to display. His austere lamp exchanged for a warmer, more eclectic piece I'd found. At a local gallery. The place feels different, Annie observed, glancing around. Lighter somehow. I'm making changes gradually, I explained. Feels less overwhelming that way. She nodded, then placed the folder she'd been carrying on the coffee table. That's actually related to why I'm here. I have a proposition for you. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Annie wasn't usually one for mysterious propositions. I'm listening. I've been thinking about what you said last week, about feeling untethered, about needing something beyond just not being married to Roman to define this next phase. She opened the folder, revealing property listings. What if that something was a complete change of scenery? I leafed through the printouts, charming cottages and sophisticated apartments in a coastal town about 2 hours north. Are you suggesting I move? I'm suggesting you consider it, she clarified. This house, for all your redecorating, still holds the history of your marriage. Maybe a fresh space would help you figure out who you want to be now. The suggestion caught me off guard, not because it was unwelcome, but because it represented a step beyond what I'd allowed myself to contemplate. My focus had been so intensely trained on ending my marriage that I had given relatively little thought to what would follow. Divorce had been the destination. Anything beyond it remained hazy and undefined. I don't know, I said finally. The house is familiar, safe in its way. Safe isn't always best, Annie replied gently. Sometimes it's just stagnant. Her observation struck a nerve, reminiscent of my sister's assessment weeks earlier. Had I exchanged one form of self-protection for another? First becoming the strategic collector of evidence, now the cautious renovator of familiar spaces? There's something else, Annie continued, retrieving a brochure from the back of the folder. The university there has a creative writing program. They're looking for a visiting professor for the spring semester. I showed the department chair your background, and she's extremely interested. I stared at the brochure, possibilities unfolding like petals in my mind. Teaching had always been a distant ambition, something I'd considered for someday when the demands of my own writing allowed. The timing seemed almost too perfect. This feels suspiciously well-researched, I said, studying Annie with narrowed eyes. How long have you been planning this? She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Since about a week after you discovered Roman's affair. I knew eventually you'd need an exit strategy, not just from the marriage, but from the life that contained it. The realization that Annie had been planning for my future while I was still grappling with my disintegrating present brought a rush of emotion. While I had been focused on legal maneuvers and financial protections, she had been envisioning possibilities for my happiness beyond divorce. I'm not saying decide right now, she added hastily. Just consider it. Visit the town, talk to the department chair, see if it feels right. I gathered the listings and brochure, feeling their weight, not as a burden, but as tangible evidence of potential paths forward. For months, my energy had been directed toward ending something. Now I was being invited to consider beginning something else entirely. I'll think about it, I promised, and meant it. After Annie left, I returned to the bedroom with its new orientation and colors. On impulse, I opened the closet that had once housed Roman's precisely organized suits and dress shirts. The empty space seemed to expand beyond its physical dimensions, offering not just room for my own clothes, but a metaphorical blank canvas. Taking stock wasn't just about assessing what remained after loss. It was about recognizing the space that had opened for new possibilities, new choices, new versions of myself waiting to emerge. The question wasn't simply what was left, but what might be created in the newly emptied spaces of my life. For the first time since discovering Roman's betrayal, I felt something that resembled not just resolve or satisfaction, but genuine anticipation. Whatever came next would be entirely of my own making. The coastal town of Harborview looked like something from a postcard. Quaint storefronts lining a main street that sloped gently toward a working harbor. Restored Victorian homes perched on hills overlooking the water, and everywhere the crisp scent of salt air mingling with the earthy aroma of autumn leaves. I had taken Annie's suggestion and scheduled a weekend visit, combining an interview with the university's English department and viewings of potential properties. The department chair, Dr. Vivian Chen, met me at a coffee shop near campus, her enthusiasm for my work immediately evident. "Your novels have been on my contemporary fiction syllabus for years," she said, stirring honey into her tea. "The way you explore transformation through crisis resonates powerfully with students." I smiled, both flattered and slightly disoriented. By her academic analysis of themes I had written largely from intuition rather than theory. "Thank you, though I admit the transformation through crisis in my recent work comes from rather personal experience." "The best writing usually does," she replied with knowing eyes. "That's what makes the visiting professor position so valuable for our students. Learning from writers who are actively engaged with their craft, whose work emerges from lived experience, rather than purely theoretical approaches." The position she outlined seemed almost tailor-made for my circumstances. A light teaching load of 2 seminars per week, no committee responsibilities, and ample time to continue my own writing. The spring semester would begin in January, just weeks after my divorce became final. "We don't need your decision today," Dr. Chen assured me as we parted. "But I hope you'll consider it seriously. Fresh perspectives are invaluable in academic settings, especially from writers at pivotal moments in their creative development." Pivotal moments. The phrase lingered as I met with a real estate agent later that afternoon, touring a series of properties that Annie had pre-selected. The first 2 were pleasant but unremarkable: a modern condo near the university, a small ranch house in a quiet neighborhood. The third, however, caught my attention immediately. Set on a bluff overlooking the harbor, the cottage was smaller than my current home, but possessed a character entirely its own. Wide windows capturing ocean views, built-in bookshelves lining the living room walls, a kitchen with vintage charm updated with modern appliances. Most compelling was the sunroom at the back, its 3 glass walls creating a perfect writing space bathed in natural light. The previous owner was a marine biologist, the agent explained as I stood in the sunroom, imagining my laptop on the built-in desk, my reference books arranged on nearby shelves. She used this as her study for nearly 30 years before retiring to be closer to her grandchildren. 30 years of dedicated work in this light-filled space. There was something appealing about continuing that legacy of focused creativity, of making this room my own sanctuary for however long I might stay in Harborview. "It's available for rent with an option to buy," the agent continued. "The owner wants someone who will appreciate the property's unique character." I ran my hand along the smooth wooden surface of the desk, feeling an unexpected sense of rightness. "I'd like to apply," I heard myself say, "for the rental, with the option to consider purchase later." The agent's smile brightened. "Wonderful. I had a feeling this would be the one. It has a certain energy that seems to match what you described wanting." By Sunday evening, my application had been approved, the teaching position formally offered, and a tentative timeline established for my transition to Harborview. Driving back to the city, I felt a curious blend of excitement and apprehension, the natural response to change, even change one has chosen. The house was quiet when I returned, Roman's absence now familiar rather than jarring. I moved through the rooms with fresh eyes, seeing not just the spaces we had shared but the life those spaces had contained, the dinner parties we'd hosted, the Sunday mornings reading separate sections of the newspaper, the quiet evenings when we'd worked side by side, me on my manuscripts, Roman on his client submissions. Not all of it had been false. That was the complex truth I was finally allowing myself to acknowledge. There had been genuine connection, authentic joy, real partnership, at least in the beginning. Roman's betrayal hadn't erased those truths. It had merely revealed that they were insufficient to sustain what followed. In the office, I began organizing my writing materials, sorting reference books and research notes into categories for packing. The manuscript of my new novel, now accepted for publication, sat on my desk, its pages marked with my editor's enthusiastic comments. Beside it lay the legal folder containing my divorce documents, the final hearing scheduled for next month. These two objects, the creative work born from my pain and the legal documentation of my marriage's end, represented the dual aspects of my recent journey. One looked backward, formally concluding a chapter that had already effectively ended. The other looked forward, channeling difficult experience into something meaningful and lasting. I opened my laptop and composed an email to Dr. Chen, formally accepting the visiting professor position for the spring semester. Next, I confirmed with the real estate agent that I would take the cottage beginning in January, giving myself time to gradually relocate after the divorce was finalized. With these practical details addressed, I turned to the more personal aspects of rebuilding. I created a list of furniture and belongings I would take to Harborview, items that held positive associations or purely practical value. The rest, including most of the furniture Roman and I had selected together, I would sell or donate, funding a fresh start with pieces chosen solely by me. My phone chimed with a text from Lillian. "How was Harborview?" Annie told me about her master plan. I smiled, typing back, "It was perfect. I'm taking the teaching position and renting a cottage with an ocean view." Her reply came immediately. "This calls for celebration. Dinner tomorrow?" "Absolutely. Bring champagne. We're toasting new beginnings." Setting down my phone, I moved to the bedroom window, gazing out at the city skyline that had been the backdrop to my married life. Soon, this view would belong to my past, replaced by the rhythmic motion of ocean waves and the quieter pace of a coastal town. The process of rebuilding wasn't just about new locations or occupations, though those external changes provided helpful structure. The deeper rebuilding was happening internally, reconstructing my sense of self, my trust in my own judgment, my capacity for joy independent of relationship status. As I turned away from the window, I caught my reflection in the mirror, the same features that had stared back at me throughout the darkest days of discovery and legal maneuvering, but somehow different now, more settled, more certain. The eyes that looked back at me belonged to a woman who had navigated betrayal without being defined by it, who had found strength in her most vulnerable moments. Rebuilding, I realized, wasn't about erasing what had been broken, but about creating something new from the experience of brokenness itself. Not despite the fractures, but because of them, and because of the wisdom gained in putting the pieces back together in a new configuration. December arrived with a flurry of activity, packing boxes for the move to Harborview, finalizing the spring semester syllabus, and preparing for the divorce hearing that would officially end my marriage to Roman. The date had been set for December 15th, perfectly timed to conclude this chapter before the new year began. I had been so absorbed in these practical matters that the invitation caught me completely off guard. A tasteful cream envelope addressed in elegant calligraphy, bearing the return address of a prestigious downtown hotel. Inside was an invitation to the annual Literary Awards Gala, an event Roman and I had attended together every year since my first novel was published. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the gilded card with mixed emotions. Normally, Roman would have handled the RSVP, incorporating the event into his careful networking strategy, introducing me to potential collaborators while strengthening his own industry connections. This year, attending would mean navigating the evening alone, facing inevitable questions about my marriage and awkward encounters with colleagues who had known us as a couple. My finger hovered over the regrets checkbox, the safer option by far. Then my gaze fell on the nominee list, and one name jumped out: Luis Martinez, Roman's former client whose royalties had been among those Roman had embezzled. Luis had been nominated for the prestigious First Novel Award, a significant recognition that Roman should have been celebrating as his agent. Curiosity and a sense of unfinished business propelled me toward the will attend option. Before I could reconsider, I checked the box, wrote my name alone on the response card, and slipped it into the mail. The night of the gala arrived crisp and clear, stars visible even through the city's ambient light. I chose my outfit with deliberate care, not the typical literary cocktail dress I would have worn in previous years, but a sleek jumpsuit in deep emerald that Annie had helped me select, paired with a vintage Art Deco necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. Nothing Roman had ever seen, nothing that evoked our shared past. The hotel ballroom was already crowded when I arrived, literary luminaries and industry professionals mingling over champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. I accepted a glass from a passing waiter and surveyed the room, mentally preparing for the inevitability of encountering familiar faces. "There she is," a warm voice called from nearby. I turned to find Archer Williams, a best-selling thriller writer whose work I had always admired. "I was hoping you'd be here." His genuine welcome eased some of my tension. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, accepting his friendly embrace. "Congratulations on your nomination. The new book is extraordinary." "Coming from you, that means something," he said. "Listen, I've been meaning to reach out. I heard about the situation with Roman and the agency. Several of us have moved to new representation, and I wanted you to know it wasn't just about the financial issues." I nodded, appreciating his discretion in a public setting. "Thank you. It's been a complicated time." "I can imagine." He glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. "Just so you know, the literary community's support is with you. Whatever Roman may have done, no one confuses his actions with your integrity." His words touched me more deeply than I had expected, addressing an unacknowledged fear that Roman's professional misconduct might somehow taint my reputation by association. Before I could respond, a ripple of subtle movement passed through the crowd near the entrance. Roman had arrived, and he wasn't alone. Heidi stood beside him, dramatically transformed from the desperate figure I had glimpsed in Gloria's reception area. Her blonde hair was elegantly styled, her black gown tastefully sophisticated. She looked polished, professional, and utterly conscious of the attention their entrance had attracted. Archer followed my gaze, understanding immediately. "Ah, bold choice, bringing her here." "Very on-brand for Roman," I observed, surprised by the absence of pain at seeing them together. What I felt instead was a detached curiosity, as though observing characters in someone else's story. "Want to make a strategic exit?" Archer offered. "There's a quiet bar upstairs where several of us usually escape when the networking gets too intense." I considered his kind offer, tempted by the easy escape it presented. Then I caught sight of Luis Martinez standing alone near the bar, nervously adjusting his tie. The young author whose debut novel had earned a nomination despite his agent's betrayal deserved recognition from someone who understood the additional challenges he had faced. "Actually," I said, "there's someone I need to speak with first. Thank you, though. I may find you upstairs later." Archer squeezed my arm supportively before moving away, leaving me to navigate toward Luis without crossing Roman's path. I managed to reach the bar undetected, positioning myself beside the young author. "Luis Martinez," I said, extending my hand. "I'm a great admirer of your work." His face brightened with recognition. You're Roman's wife. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know the right. Just call me by my name," I said gently. "And congratulations on your nomination." "It's richly deserved," Relief softened his features. Thank you. It's been, well, a challenging year, professionally speaking. I can imagine, I replied, conscious of the delicate territory we were entering. Has your new agent been supportive through the transition? Very, he confirmed, though I still don't fully understand what happened with Roman. One day he was my agent. The next I was receiving formal notification that our contract had been terminated due to unforeseen circumstances. I hesitated, aware of the confidentiality agreement I had signed. The literary world can be complicated, I offered finally. But your talent transcends any agency issues. The nomination proves that. Luis nodded, though confusion lingered in his expression. Before our conversation could continue, I sensed a presence behind me, a familiar cologne, the slight clearing of a throat I would recognize anywhere. Luis? Roman's voice was perfectly modulated for the public setting. Congratulations on the nomination. I turned slowly, meeting my almost ex-husband's gaze for the first time since the signing at Gloria's office. He looked different, thinner, with subtle signs of strain around his eyes that his expertly tailored suit couldn't disguise. Heidi hovered anxiously at his elbow, her composure slightly fractured by the unexpected encounter. Thank you, Luis replied, his tone noticeably cooler. It was a surprise, given everything. An awkward silence descended, the weight of unspoken history almost palpable among the four of us. I took a deliberate sip of champagne, allowing the moment to extend until Roman finally addressed me directly. I didn't expect to see you here, he said, his voice careful, neutral. Literary events were part of my life before they were ours, I reminded him. That hasn't changed. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of the quiet confidence that had replaced my former strategic calculation. This wasn't the confrontation he might have feared, or that Heidi had clearly been bracing for. It was simply the inevitable intersection of paths that had once been joined and now continued separately. The divorce hearing is next week, he said, lowering his voice. Will you be there in person? Yes, I confirmed. Some endings should be witnessed. Don't. You think? The Harborview Cottage welcomed me with unexpected warmth on a crisp January morning, sunlight streaming through the many windows to illuminate freshly painted walls and polished hardwood floors. I set down the last box, books for my office, carefully selected from my much larger collection, and moved through the rooms, still marveling at how quickly this space had begun to feel like home. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, the hearing itself a remarkably anticlimactic affair after months of preparation and legal maneuvering. Roman had appeared alone, Heidi conspicuously absent after our encounter at the literary gala. We had exchanged minimal pleasantries, signed the necessary documents, and with the judge's final approval, untangled the legal bonds of our decade-long marriage in less than 30 minutes. As I unpacked the books, arranging them on the built-in shelves of what was now my writing studio, I reflected on how thoroughly my life had transformed in just a few months. New home, new town, new career direction with the teaching position that would begin next week. The external changes were significant, but the internal shift felt even more profound. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the beveled glass panels, I could see Annie and Lillian on the porch, arms laden with bags and what appeared to be a potted plant. Another nearly indestructible specimen, no doubt. "Welcome wagon has arrived," Annie announced as I opened the door, bustling past me with determined efficiency. "We come bearing housewarming essentials. Wine, takeout, and yes, another plant," Lillian confirmed, following her inside. Plus moral support for the final unpacking push. Their arrival transformed the quiet cottage into a hub of activity, Annie immediately assessing the kitchen organization while Lillian arranged food on plates and poured generous glasses of wine. I watched them with a surge of gratitude, recognizing how their steady presence had anchored me throughout the turbulence of the past year. This place is perfect for you, Lillian declared, gazing around the open-concept living area with its ocean-facing windows. I can already envision you writing here, hosting dinner parties, building a life that's entirely your own creation. That's the plan, I agreed, accepting the wine she offered. Though I'm starting small, mastering the faculty coffee machine before attempting dinner parties. Annie emerged from the kitchen, having apparently reorganized my cabinets to her satisfaction. Speaking of faculty life, have you met any interesting colleagues yet? Potential friends? Eligible professors with literary inclinations and no history of embezzlement? I laughed, appreciating her characteristic bluntness. I've attended exactly one departmental meeting and a welcome lunch. So far, everyone seems perfectly nice and refreshingly uninterested in my personal life. Boring, Annie pronounced, helping herself to spring rolls. But probably healthy. We settled around the small dining table, the familiar rhythm of our conversation a comforting constant amid so much change. They updated me on city happenings, mutual friends, neighborhood developments, the closing of our favorite bakery and opening of a promising new one. News that would have been part of my daily life just weeks ago now reached me as dispatches from a world I was no longer fully part of. Have you heard anything about Roman? Lillian asked eventually, her tone careful. Not that you need to know, but just in case you were wondering. I hesitated, realizing I hadn't thought about Roman in several days, a small victory in itself. Nothing recently. Last I heard, he was working with a lawyer on the embezzlement charges, negotiating some kind of settlement with the authors involved. And Heidi? Still in the picture? Annie inquired, never one to shy away from uncomfortable questions. I believe so, though their grand plans for a fresh start have probably been complicated by Roman's legal and financial situation. I was surprised by how little curiosity I felt about the details of their relationship. Honestly, it feels like a story I read once rather than lived through. That's called healing, Lillian observed with a gentle smile. When your own past starts to feel like someone else's story. After dinner, Annie insisted on hanging the artwork I had brought, carefully selected pieces that held positive memories or had been acquired since the separation. Lillian helped me arrange the bedroom, transforming the generic rental space into a personal sanctuary with new bedding, carefully placed photographs, and the soft lighting I preferred. By the time they left, promising to visit again soon, the cottage had undergone a subtle but significant transformation. It wasn't just a well-appointed rental anymore. It had become unmistakably mine, filled with objects I had chosen, arranged according to my preferences, designed to support the life I was creating rather than preserving echoes of what had been lost. Alone again, I wandered through the rooms, pausing at the windows to watch moonlight silvering the harbor below. The day's physical work had been satisfying, but I found myself drawn to the writing studio, where my laptop waited on the antique desk I'd discovered at a local shop. The manuscript of my next novel, begun in the aftermath of the divorce hearing, called to me with quiet insistence. I settled into the chair, the room illuminated only by a small lamp and the moonlight spilling through uncurtained windows. Unlike my previous novel, written in the crucible of betrayal and legal strategy, this work emerged from a different emotional landscape. Not the white-hot intensity of crisis, but the more nuanced territory of rebuilding. My protagonist, like me, had navigated significant loss. But the story wasn't about the dissolution of her former life. It focused instead on the delicate, courageous act of constructing something new, a narrative about beginning rather than ending, about the particular vulnerability and strength required to start again. As my fingers moved across the keyboard, words flowing with surprising ease, I recognized that I was no longer writing solely from pain or anger or the need to make sense of betrayal. I was writing from a place of hard-won wisdom, of compassion for both the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. This was my new normal, not defined by Roman's absence or by what had been taken from me, but by what I was actively creating. The cottage with its ocean views and quiet rooms. The teaching position that would connect me to young writers just discovering their voices. The manuscript growing beneath my fingertips, telling a story that might someday offer others the same solace that writing it had given me. Outside, waves broke against the shoreline in rhythmic succession, a natural metronome marking the passage of time, the steady progression from one moment to the next. Within these walls, within myself, something was taking shape that belonged entirely to the future rather than the past. Not a replacement for what had been lost, but something wholly original, built from experience, choice, and the particular. Courage that comes from surviving what you once thought would destroy you. Spring arrived in Harborview with theatrical fanfare, cherry blossoms erupting along the main street, fishing boats freshly painted for the new season, and students emerging. From library hibernation to study on the sun-dappled campus lawn, I had settled into a rhythm that felt both novel and natural. Teaching Tuesday and Thursday mornings, writing in my Ocean View studio most afternoons, and gradually integrating myself into the small community that had welcomed me without question or excessive curiosity. My creative writing seminars had attracted an eclectic mix of students: earnest English majors with literary ambitions, science students seeking a creative outlet, and several older community members taking advantage of the university's audit program. Among the latter was Gloria, a retired judge in her 70s who shared my divorce attorney's name and similarly formidable intellect, though applied to poetry rather than legal strategy. "Professor," Gloria called, approaching me after class, one Thursday in early April. "I've been meaning to ask if you'd consider being a guest speaker at our Literary Society meeting next month. We're hosting a discussion on resilience narratives in contemporary fiction, and your work has been central to our conversations." I hesitated, still adjusting to being addressed as professor, despite nearly 3 months in the role. "I'd be honored," I replied, gathering my teaching notes. "Though I should warn you, I'm still figuring out how to discuss my own work in academic contexts." Gloria's laugh was warm and knowing. "That's precisely why we want you. Too many academic discussions remove the living, breathing author from the analysis. We're interested in the messy reality of creation, not just the polished theories about it." As we walked together toward the campus coffee shop, a post-seminar ritual I had established early in the semester, Gloria mentioned that the Literary Society included several published authors from the area, including a mystery writer whose work I had long admired. "Seth Adams lives here?" I asked, surprised to hear the nationally recognized author resided in our small coastal town. "For nearly 20 years, Gloria confirmed. "Keeps to himself mostly, but he's faithful about our monthly meetings. Says we keep him honest about his work." The name tugged at my memory, something familiar yet just out of reach. "I'd love to meet him. His latest mystery was brilliantly structured." Gloria smiled enigmatically. "I think you'll find you have more in common than just writing. He came to Harborview after a difficult divorce as well. Found his creative voice again here, much like you seem to be doing." The parallel struck me as both comforting and slightly unnerving, the idea that someone else had walked a similar path and found restoration in this same coastal sanctuary. Before I could question Gloria further, my phone chimed with an incoming call from my editor in New York. "I should take this," I apologized, stepping away to answer. The call brought unexpected news. My most recent novel, the one written during the discovery of Roman's betrayal and the subsequent divorce proceedings, had been shortlisted for the National Book Award. My editor's voice bubbled with excitement as she outlined the publicity plans, the fall ceremony. In New York, the significant boost this would bring to both sales and my literary standing. "We need you back in the city for a press lunch next month," she concluded. "Just a small gathering with key literary journalists. Your publisher is thrilled, absolutely over the moon about this recognition." I ended the call in a state of stunned disbelief, staring at the cherry blossoms fluttering against a perfectly blue sky. The news should have been purely joyful, the kind of professional validation every writer secretly hopes for, but it arrived with complicated undercurrents. Returning to the city, even briefly, meant potentially encountering Roman, navigating spaces we had once shared, revisiting a past I had worked so diligently to process and release. More disconcerting was the irony that my greatest professional achievement to date had emerged directly from my greatest personal pain. The novel that had caught the award committee's attention chronicled a woman's discovery of profound betrayal and her subsequent journey toward reclaiming her identity. Fiction that paralleled my reality with only the thinnest veil of narrative, distance. Lost in these thoughts, I almost missed Gloria's approach, her expression concerned as she registered my distraction. "Good news or bad?" she asked, the directness that made her such an effective workshop participant evident in her question. "Complicated news," I replied honestly. "My novel's been shortlisted for a major award." Her face brightened. "That's wonderful, though your expression suggests there's more to the story." "The novel was written during my divorce," I explained, feeling a strange need to confide in this woman who had become both student and friend. "It's difficult to celebrate work that came from such a painful place." Gloria considered this, her expression thoughtful. "My dear, the most significant blessings often arrive disguised as disasters. When my husband of 30 years left me for his dental hygienist, yes, a cliché, I'm aware, I thought my life was effectively over at 62. Instead, I finally wrote the poetry I had postponed for decades, traveled to countries I had only read about, and found a community that valued me for my mind rather than my role as someone's wife." She patted my arm gently. "Your pain produced art that resonates so deeply it's being recognized at the highest levels. That doesn't diminish the suffering you experienced, but it does transform it into something meaningful, not just for you, but for readers who find their own struggles reflected in your words." Her perspective shifted something in my thinking, offering a frame that acknowledged both the pain of my experience and the value of what had emerged from it. The award nomination wasn't a silver lining that somehow compensated for Roman's betrayal. Nothing could do that. But it represented something I had created entirely separate from him, a testament to my resilience rather than a reminder of my wounds. "Thank you," I said simply. "That helps." "Good," Gloria replied briskly. "Now, about that literary society meeting, I think May 15th would work perfectly. After your press lunch in the city, but before the summer tourism season overwhelms us all. And I promise we're a gentler audience than your graduate seminar students." As we parted ways, I found myself smiling at the unexpected blessing of this new friendship, one that would never have entered my life had I remained in my marriage, in the city, in the carefully constructed identity I had maintained as Roman's wife. The award nomination was significant, yes, but equally valuable were these smaller gifts. Conversations that challenged my thinking, connections formed without the shadow of my past, and the gradual discovery that loss had cleared space for possibilities I couldn't have imagined in my previous life. The literary press lunch in New York felt like visiting a foreign country where I happened to speak the language. The landmarks were familiar: the Midtown restaurant where publishing deals were celebrated, the faces of editors and critics I had known for years, the particular rhythm of literary conversation with its careful balance of intellectual discourse and industry gossip. Yet I moved through this once familiar world as a visitor rather than a resident, observing with the slight detachment of someone who now belonged elsewhere. My editor, beaming with pride throughout the event, introduced me to influential critics and fellow nominees. "Her most powerful work yet," she told anyone who would listen. "A fearless exploration of betrayal and reinvention." I accepted congratulations with genuine gratitude while deflecting questions about the novel's autobiographical elements with practiced responses. Yes, I drew from personal experience. No, not every detail mirrored my life. Yes, Writing through difficult circumstances had been both challenging and cathartic. What I didn't share was how thoroughly the act of writing had saved me during those dark months, how transforming my pain into narrative had provided structure. When my personal life was chaotic, how creating a protagonist who navigated betrayal with dignity had helped me discover my own strength. Some truths belonged to me alone, too intimate to become talking points at a promotional lunch. The event concluded earlier than expected, leaving me with several hours before my train back to Harborview. On impulse, I decided to walk through Central Park, allowing myself to revisit a space that held memories from both my marriage and my earlier life in the city. It was there, seated on a bench near the lake, that I spotted him. Roman, walking alone along the pathway, his face turned toward the water. He looked different somehow, his confident stride replaced by a more measured pace, his expression thoughtful rather than calculating. For a moment, I considered slipping away unnoticed. There was no legal or practical reason for us to interact. Now, no loose ends requiring conversation. Yet something kept me seated, a curiosity not about Roman specifically, but about how I would feel seeing him up close, speaking with him as the person I had become, rather than the woman he had betrayed. He noticed me before I could decide, his step faltering as recognition dawned. After a brief hesitation, he approached, stopping a respectful distance from my bench. "I heard about the nomination," he said, his voice carrying none of the defensive edge I remembered from our last encounters. "Congratulations. It's well-deserved." "Thank you," I replied, gesturing to the empty space beside me, an invitation he accepted after a moment's consideration. We sat in silence briefly, the afternoon sun warming the spring air around us, the sounds of the park creating a buffer against uncomfortable intimacy. "How is Harborview?" he asked finally. "Annie mentioned you're teaching now." "It suits me," I answered, surprised by how easily I could discuss my new life with him. "The town, the teaching, all of it. I'm writing more consistently than I ever have." He nodded, a flicker of what might have been regret crossing his features. "I always said you needed space to fully realize your talent. I just never imagined—" He trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. "That the space would come from our marriage ending?" I completed gently. "Life rarely follows the narratives we construct for it." Roman smiled faintly at this, acknowledging the writer's observation. How very true. Another silence fell between us, less awkward than the first. I studied him with objective eyes, noting the gray at his temples that hadn't been there a year ago, the slight softening of his once sharp jawline. He had aged, as had I, but the change seemed more pronounced in him, as though the unraveling of his carefully constructed life had accelerated the physical evidence of time's passage. "Heidi and I ended things," he said abruptly, answering the question I hadn't asked. "3 months ago. Turns out relationships founded on deception rarely survive the consequences of being caught." I nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor sympathy, just a detached recognition of predictable outcomes. "And professionally? I'm rebuilding, slowly. Working with a smaller agency, focusing on emerging authors. The financial penalties were substantial." He hesitated, then added, "But necessary. The right thing, ultimately." The admission surprised me. Not the financial consequences, which Gloria had ensured would be significant, but his acceptance of them as appropriate. This wasn't the Roman I had known, who justified his actions through elaborate rationalizations and deflected responsibility whenever possible. "And you?" he asked. "Beyond the nomination and the teaching, are you happy?" The question was sincere, without the undertone of manipulation or strategic information gathering that had colored so many of our exchanges during the divorce. "I'm at peace," I answered truthfully, which turns out to be better than the happiness I was settling for. The Harborview Literary Society meeting was held in the sunlit community room of the local library, windows open to catch the May breeze carrying the scent of lilacs from the garden outside. About 30 people had gathered, a mix of ages and backgrounds united by their love of literature and thoughtful conversation. Gloria had introduced me with flattering thoroughness, mentioning not just my novels and recent nomination, but also the impact my teaching had already made on the university's writing program. As I moved to the small podium, I was struck by how comfortable I felt in this room of relative strangers, more at ease than I had been at the prestigious press lunch surrounded by industry connections I'd known for years. Resilience narratives, I began, are often misunderstood as simple stories of overcoming adversity, of falling down and getting back up. But the literature that resonates most deeply acknowledges something more complex, that we don't simply return to our former selves after profound challenges. We become someone new, someone who incorporates the experience rather than merely surviving. In the discussion that followed was lively and thoughtful, participants sharing perspectives that ranged from scholarly analysis to deeply personal responses to literature that had sustained them through difficult times. I found myself speaking more candidly than I had anticipated about the relationship between my own experiences and my writing, though still maintaining the boundaries I had established between public persona and private truth. After the formal discussion concluded, attendees mingled over coffee and locally baked cookies. I was engaged in conversation with a particularly insightful graduate student when Gloria appeared at my elbow, accompanied by a tall, silver-haired man whose face seemed vaguely familiar. "Professor, I'd like you to meet Seth Adams," she said, her tone suggesting this introduction held special significance. Seth, our visiting novelist whose work we've discussed so often. Recognition dawned as we shook hands, not just of the successful mystery writer whose books I had admired, but of something more personally relevant. "You were at the Literary Awards Gala in December," I said. "Sitting with Archer Williams, he—" smiled, confirming my recollection. "I was. Though we weren't properly introduced then. I've been following your work for some time, even before Gloria began singing your praises." As our conversation unfolded, I discovered the parallels Gloria had hinted at were indeed striking. Seth had arrived in Harborview 15 years earlier, after a high-profile divorce from his publisher, a scandal that had briefly dominated literary gossip before being replaced by newer controversies. Like me, he had sought not just escape but reconstruction, finding in this coastal town the space to rebuild both his creative practice and his understanding of himself. The unexpected gift of that difficult time, he told me as we walked along, the harbor after the meeting, was the freedom to discover who I might become when I was no longer defined by that relationship. My writing changed, became more authentic, less concerned with market expectations. My life simplified in ways that proved surprisingly satisfying. His words resonated deeply, articulating something I had been experiencing but hadn't fully named. The lasting impact of Roman's betrayal and our subsequent divorce wasn't primarily the pain it had caused or the practical challenges it had created, though both were significant. The true lasting impact was the person I had become through navigating. Those experiences, someone more resilient, yes, but also more authentic, more attuned to my own needs and values, more willing to risk vulnerability in my writing and my relationships. As sunset painted the harbor in shades of gold and rose, I found myself describing to Seth the moment in Gloria's office when Roman had asked why I hadn't tried to save our marriage. I told him I deserved better than fighting for someone who had already decided I wasn't worth keeping, I recalled. But the truth I've discovered since then is more profound. I deserved the opportunity to discover who I could be on my own terms, without compromising my values or diminishing my voice to maintain a relationship that had become fundamentally dishonest. Seth nodded in understanding. The end of one story became the beginning of a better one. Exactly, I agreed, watching seabirds circle against the deepening twilight. And unlike the stories I write, this one has no predetermined ending. just chapters waiting to be discovered one day at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.